Hi guys, good evening. Happy St. Patrick's Day to you. Hope you're having a fun, safe holiday out there. And welcome back once again to the EdWord. I'm your host, Eddie, and in tonight's video, I will be discussing what I thought of the latest and very interesting new horror movie that graced our screens earlier tonight. I saw an advanced screening of the movie X. Not X-Men, just X, as in terms of adult entertainment. This is the horror movie, I think you've seen trailers and posters for it, which features a group of young people trying to make their own adult film secretly on a farmer's isolated farm. And of course, things go to hell very quickly. Surprising, I know. Now, before I begin, of course, please be warned. This is a spoiler-filled review, so if you haven't seen X yet and you plan to watch it at some point tomorrow or during this weekend, you do not want to keep watching or listening, as I'm going to be discussing, plot details, spoilers, all that jazz. That being said, you have been warned. Let's get right back into it. First and foremost, I'd like to point out that I'm wearing a very appropriate shirt for this movie and its review. I'll explain why in a minute, but I wore this because I knew I was seeing a horror movie later tonight, and this is my Crawl t-shirt, the hit creature feature from a few years ago from Paramount about people fighting alligators in their house while trying to fight off a hurricane as well. And I didn't realize until I was watching this movie what an appropriate choice this shirt was, because there is an alligator predominantly featured in this film. In fact, it probably features it's featured in one of the most memorable bloody kills in the film, because obviously all of our characters get killed off one by one except Final Girl, as per usual in these horror slashers. And one of our girls, who is not the final girl, gets her head bitten off and basically ripped apart by this big voracious alligator that lives in the pond on the farm that this sinister old couple lives on. You know, I gotta say, I pretty much got what I expected out of this movie, like from the trailers that I saw, the footage that I've seen. This movie was pretty much what I expected it to be. Nothing really surprised me. Unfortunately, I felt like a lot of the kills were teased in too much detail in the trailers for this film. However, the one girl's death at the jaws of the alligator was not featured in any of the trailers, and that was a pleasant, refreshing surprise. I'm like, oh good, at least one of these deaths was saved for the big screen, and it was one of the more memorable ones too, so that's good. I mean, don't get me wrong, their deaths were very bloody, violent, and memorable in this movie, and done in a very weird artistic fashion. And that's the thing about A24 horror movies, or any A24 film in general. I feel like it's either hit or miss with them. It's not necessarily good, but it's not necessarily bad either. And a good example of that is that I really liked Hereditary a lot, between Hereditary and Midsommar. Midsommar I liked fine, but I didn't love it like I was hoping I would. I liked it fine. It was unsettling and creepy, but it wasn't as good in my mind as Hereditary was very good. And both were A24 films. And I feel like with A24, it's kind of a hit or miss with them in terms of their horror movies. And unfortunately, X feels like a little bit of a miss to me. It still had its moments. It kept my interest from beginning to end, although there were some scenes where it felt like the pacing or the scene was moving just as slowly as the elderly couple moved in this movie. And I honestly kept thinking or wondering to myself, is there like a secret killer we haven't seen yet? Like, do they have a hidden stowaway bastard of a son who's a murderer, and that's why they're touchy about people being around their place? Nope, it's the two of them doing all the killing despite their frail appearance. And like, is this for show, or are they really this sick and frail? They really were. They were just very well armed and probably just took advantage of being underestimated by their visitors. Not a huge fan of the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre. I liked it fine, not one of my favorite horror movies, but I did like how much of a homage this movie was to Texas Chainsaw, And I loved how the filmmaker and writer Ty West was clearly a fan of horror movies such as Psycho and Scream. Well, more Psycho than Scream, perhaps, because Psycho did the close-up of the killer's hand gripping the knife as it brings the stabbing motion down into the victim, and Scream just took it many years later. And they actually name drop and reference Scream in this film, Psycho in this film. And the thing that cracked me up, too, is like, so in this world, the movie Psycho exists, but Texas Chainsaw Massacre doesn't, because if it did, I don't think any of these kids would have partook in this little road trip to find an isolated farm to shoot their fuck picture on. And you know what? This movie, I will say this, was surprisingly way funnier than I thought it was going to be. And the crowd was quite receptive to it, too. It was a full house, the one screening me and my friend went to. And we laughed along with most of the same scenes as the crowd did. And a lot of the porno stuff is just so cheesy and just so cringy. It just makes you chuckle. And it's funny, too, because one of the scenes that was especially funny is when the ex-Marine goes to the door of their boarding house and greets the old man completely naked. Not the old man is, the ex-Marine is. And from the old man's point of view, you can see the guy's head and his face and most of his upper torso, but his lower torso is in complete darkness and shadow. But we do get a really distinct silhouette of the guy's massive dong. And it's not erect or anything, obviously. It's just dangling there. And it's just so funny and catches you off guard. And it adds a great moment of humor to a pretty tense atmosphere or scene, because the movie does start to gain traction as the murders begin to occur. And the murders themselves are violent and very memorable. So the film itself, wasn't terrible, but it wasn't great either. But it was somewhere in between. But it still made for a good evening well spent at the movies, I feel like. And, sadly, he's only featured in the very beginning and the very end of the film, but I really like the sheriff a lot. I mean, he just had a commanding presence when he was on screen, and he had some great lines, too. Like, so what do you think happened, Sheriff? Oh, the hell should I know? It's like the most honest answer you could ever get out of a cop ever. Like, as they're surveying a horrific crime scene in a bloody aftermath. Like, how the hell should I know? I just got here. But you know what? Everybody did a great job in it. Unsettling and, not really unsettling, I should say. I never felt unsettled, but some of the love scenes or the more intimate scenes with the older folks was a bit off-putting. And I'm sorry if that sounds ageist. I don't mean to offend anybody. But it was probably just the really janky makeup effects that the actors were wearing. Because I'm sure they may have gotten elderly people to play those roles, but they probably just put a ton more makeup on them than how they actually look, just for the ambiance and the eerie tone and vibe throughout the film. I also did think it was kind of funny how the girl who got shot in the face after the old man shoots her himself, how she has one little sign of life where she's like, and it's a jump scare to him. It doesn't really scare the audience, but it scares him enough to give him a fucking heart attack. Of course, his heart may have been weakened from just plowing his wife's brains out. Oh God, speaking of plowing, it cracked me up in the very beginning of the film when we saw what was written on the side of the van, which was plowing service. I'm like, ah. So, you know what? This movie wasn't terrible, but it wasn't great either. But it still made for a adequately entertaining watch. So that's what I think. What did you guys think of it? I'd love to hear your thoughts and feelings on it. Thank you so much for watching this film review. Have an awesome rest of your night. Stay tuned and subscribe to this channel for at least one more video I'll be posting up later tonight right before I hit the sack. So thanks for bearing with me. Have a good one. And of course, until next time, what's your favorite scary movie?